when we talk about metabolic health, that's an umbrella term to pretty much everything that your doctor's checking when you go in for your annual physical, your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your triglycerides, your waist circumference, your blood sugar levels, and your insulin resistance, all those things. Those are all considered under that metabolic health piece. And interestingly, all can be impacted by fasting and fasting mimicking. Skin health. Autoimmune studies have started coming out. There's oncology studies that are coming out. I mean, the results really are, again, so wide ranging because of this root cause effect. So that's why people are so excited about fasting. It's not something new. It is something that is rooted in our body's natural ability to heal itself. And we've been able to now show through much clinical research that it has a very wide ranging impact.
Renee, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to talk about everything health and longevity related, but maybe we could start with a little bit of your background for people listening.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you so much for having me here. It is always such a pleasure to talk about some topics that really are so near and dear to my heart. They are near and dear to my heart because I myself am a longevity dietitian by trade. I have, and how do you get that title? Well, you get your master's degree in a very specific sect of nutrition, which is longevity and health span nutrition. So there's really only one program in the world doing this. It was founded by one of the leading longevity researchers, Dr. Longo, in partnership with the University of Southern California. So that's really where, outside of my passion for nutrition, which stemmed much earlier than that, where my deep understanding and passion for longevity really grew. And since then, I have spent, the last decade or so supporting individuals in growing their health span. And when we talk about health span, we can kind of dig deeper into that. But the difference here that we really want to pin down is the difference between just living longer and living healthier. Health span is how long are you living at your healthiest. And unfortunately, the World Health Organization just came out somewhat recently with this differentiation between the age at which we live until, which is closer to our late 70s, and the age in which we have our health span until, which is in our early 60s, which is crazy because that means that there's about 20 years almost of our lives that are spent in sickness and discomfort and not really optimizing those last 20 years of life. So that's really what my focus is thinking about now and later how we can optimize to really shrink those unhealthy years to ideally close to zero.
I absolutely love that. And I think I come from a financial background and I work in real estate now, but I work with a lot of investors and I'm always trying to help them plan their finances so that they can enjoy. As you get older, you have the money and the freedom and flexibility to really enjoy life. But if you don't have the health, I imagine most people are going to say, well, what's the point? And I think that's the caveat when people are asked, like, would you like to be a centenarian? They normally say yes, but only if I'm healthy. And I think we all feel the same way. We all want to live a long life, but it's with the caveat that only if we're healthy.
Exactly. And, it's really unfortunate. I went to a really wonderful retreat and event where one of the questions that was asked and one of the experiences that was pushed, that everyone was asked to do, was to close their eyes and to envision themselves in their 80s or their 90s. And everyone was then asked, how many of us thought that we were, frail or weak. And a lot of people raised their hand because we just assume that is where we're going to be in our later years. And that is something that I really want to push back against because it isn't a given. It certainly is a world where, and there are some individuals that really are healthy all the way through their lives. And I want people to want longevity because they recognize that they can have health span.
Yeah, I'm 46 and my father is 30 years older, so he's 76. And I didn't realize until recently just how lucky I am to have a role model like that, where he's incredibly healthy. And for instance, he's retired And my mom's originally from the south of France. And every summer they spend 3 months in the south of France. And my dad will always do like a 2 month hike in the Alps or the Pyrenees Mountains. And he's so healthy. Like, and I don't think he realizes how unusual that is, that he has the physical capacity to do that. But I grew up just seeing my dad being very active and healthy. And I just assumed it was normal. And sadly, for so many people that are so sedentary, it's not normal.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's really quite that his early exercise and motivation and even being spending time outdoors, all of those things definitely played into why he's still able to do it today. And unfortunately, even though most people can do those things when they're younger, because they don't do them, it becomes, even when maybe, they think, well, when I'm retired or when I'm 60, that's when I'll worry about that. That's when I'll have time or the energy or et cetera. But if you wait until then, it actually becomes drastically more difficult to do those things, because if you haven't taken the time and the energy to invest in yourself prior to that point, your body will be taxed and you'll have to pay the price at some point.
I love the idea of nutrition because I go back and forth. So I actually just got some bone chips removed from my right elbow, and that surgery was 8 days ago. So I'm still kind of recovering. I'm in pain. I didn't take any painkillers, so I can be relatively clear-headed in this conversation. But that was a case where I had to see a surgeon. He had to like physically clean up my joint. But in general, I feel like I want to try every non-surgical, non-traditional medicine approach to life and health. And I think nutrition, isn't there some statistic where most medical doctors, they take like a real basic class of nutrition that's outdated within a year or two or something like that? And I know how important nutrition is because when I was a teenager, my older brother, he was trying to be a bodybuilder. So he was eating everything under the sun, trying to get the calories in, lifting weights every day. And so he got this really bad case of psoriasis on his body. And he never had acne as a teenager. He always had really good skin. So he completely freaked out. And he started seeing, I don't know how he found it, but we were living in the suburbs of London. So he started seeing this, I guess, homeopathic doctor in London. And she had him change his whole diet, clean up. And I remember he said to me, he said, listen, of all the things to do, because I was teenagers, you don't really think about your health and longevity. He said, just do one thing for me and just drink a lot of water during the day, just clean water. As a kid, no one wants to drink water. And I just saw how the changes that she made completely transformed. He completely cured it. His skin, and so some people live with psoriasis their whole life, but it was just the skin was a physical symptom of him overloading his body with all these different toxins in this crazy diet he was trying to eat. So I just believe that diet alone can be the difference between being healthy and not healthy. And you can watch even professional athletes. I come from the professional fighting world, and you see these people, they're in great shape. They train so hard, but they're overweight because it's impossible to outtrain a bad diet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. I couldn't agree more on all of those fronts. It's really, I think at the end of the day, what people need to realize is that when we eat and what we eat, it's what fuels every cell in our body. That energy that we consume, that saying that you are what you eat, I mean, in the most real and scientific sense of the word, that is also kind of the truth. And so it really matters. And it's something that we do, every single day. We're constantly eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, depending on your routine. I know there's some people that are going to tell me, well, I only have one meal a day, but still that meal of that day is still what is powering you and what is fueling you and what is in some cases toxifying you or bringing you back, or, the food can really work in so many ways for and against us. So because it is so meaningful in our lives in so many ways, it really has a significant impact on our health, our wellness, our mental health, even so many different areas of our self.
Yeah. And I remember when I was growing up, all the athletes would always talk about your body can only absorb a certain amount of nutrition. So you want to eat basically from the moment you wake up to the moment you sleep and have small meals and try to get at least 30 grams of protein in every meal. And then recently, I don't know when it started, but there's so much talk about fasting, at least the last 5 years, maybe 10 years. And it seems like for the longest time, I didn't separate I guess, athletic performance with health. They're two very different things. So I've been seeing this longevity doctor for the last maybe 4 or 5 years, and he's always bugging me, and I'm past due to do one of the prolonged 5-day fast mimicking diets. And he said it just cleans out your body. And then so I was so excited when we got connected because I know you do the clinical research behind prolong. So I'd love to, if you could maybe talk a little bit about I guess the benefits of fasting, and then how the fasting mimicking diet just makes it so much more accessible, because I'm a pretty disciplined guy, but the idea of doing a 3-day or a 5-day water only fast is very intimidating. And it just makes it so much more accessible. And honestly, I think they said don't train while you're on the diet, but I think I still worked out every day. Nothing crazy, but I felt good. I wasn't dead. And I think most people, we have so many demands of life and family and work and all the stuff we're doing. You can't comprehend like, oh, I'm not going to eat for 3 days or 5 days. It's very hard mentally. So I'd love to pick your brains about that and how you got involved with them.
Absolutely. Well, first, let me just say that on the side of athletics and longevity and muscle building and longevity, we should come back to that topic because I have so much to say about that. And it is certainly a really interesting dichotomy of how you can, what we like to say, have a double bottom line of also support your muscular health and your athleticism, but also support your longevity. And sometimes they are at odds, and we can talk about the science about that. But importantly, yes, we're here to talk about fasting and fasting mimicking. So let's dig into this. Fasting is really, if you think about it, the very earliest form of diet, of nutrition plans. And it wasn't because we were trying to lose weight or, look our best. It was because we were forced to. That was just through evolution. Or in our earliest days, there wasn't always food around. And so our bodies had to learn to thrive during periods when there wasn't food and nutrition around, and take advantage of this time where food wasn't present for us to signal in our body to grow and to build and to, make things, whether it be our muscle or building new cellular components, et cetera. Instead of doing that, when food is not present, our body will take advantage of this time to repair and rejuvenate and clean up. And so it's really cool because now we can still take advantage of that capacity, of that evolutionary benefit that our body has. But we have to actually give it the chance to do it by getting into this fasted state, by signaling to our body, hey, we're not going to have a ton of nutrition here for a little while. So now focus, instead of growing all the time, on repair and rejuvenation. So when our body focuses on repair and rejuvenation, the benefits are truly, and I do not say this slightly, immense. We're talking about, because when we fast, there's repair and rejuvenation at the cellular level, and we can really dig into what that means in a bit. But because we're working at the deepest, most root level in our body, that is, our cells make up everything, we can see a lot of changes across the board. So we see research. There's now over 47 clinical trials in fasting mimicking alone. There's a lot more on overall fasting as well. There's, hundreds, if not thousands. What we're seeing are benefits to, of course, yes, weight loss. People always are going to start there, but also on longevity, on our metabolic health. So when we talk about metabolic health, that's an umbrella term to pretty much everything that your doctor's checking when you go in for your annual physical: your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your triglycerides, your waist circumference. I'm sure your blood sugar levels and your insulin resistance, all those things, those are all considered under that metabolic health piece. And interestingly, all can be impacted by fasting and fasting mimicking. Skin health, autoimmune studies have started coming out. There's oncology studies that are coming out. The results really are, again, so wide-ranging because of this root cause effect. So that's why people are so excited about fasting. It's not something new. It is something that is rooted in our body's natural ability to heal itself. And we've been able to now show through so much clinical research that it has a very wide-ranging impact. But as you said, the biggest problem is who the heck is going to fast, especially for these longer fasts, these 3, 4, 5-day water-only fasts, where we see the most deep and impactful benefits, but that are so darn hard to get to because of adherence, but also safety concerns, right? We have to sometimes, especially in some individuals, fasting for that long with water only can be even dangerous. And then, of course, there's also, especially where we've kind of been pulling in the athletic side of things, but also in terms of longevity, muscle is so critical for us to maintain. And when we go in the water only fasting route, there's a higher risk of losing muscle along with some of the other weight loss that we will see that we may want a little bit more. So, for that reason, a new type of fasting has come about. This is something that Dr. Walter Longo, my mentor, who I mentioned earlier, really uncovered the capacity for our body to go into a fasted state, to do all of this amazing cleanup and repair work while we eat real food. And so I'm not just talking about broths or teas or juice cleanses. No, this is where you're having breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, whole foods, nuts, olives, seeds, crackers, soups, the list goes on. So there's really, it becomes far more manageable once we go this route. So we can talk a little bit about how it works and what it looks like, but I think that's probably a good overarching review.
No, that's awesome. And well, I think I've done 3, and my wife's done 2 of those 3 with me, and we're past due for the next one. When I did it, it seems strange that it seemed kind of carb heavy, I guess carb and fat heavy, right? There's not really any protein. I'd love to know a little bit. I'd love you to talk a little bit about the science behind it, because intuitively it didn't seem like it would mimic a fast when I was taking it. But obviously I trust my doctor, and my doctor said, he said, your mentor, Dr. Longo, is incredible, and he believes it 100%. And he's just, my doctor's the smartest person I know, because every time I talk to him, he basically, I hear all these things from longevity podcasts, and I read longevity books and everything, and he basically kind of explains things I've heard, but better, and he connects the dots for me and everything. So every time I talk to him for a consultation, I always feel like, man, I've learned something new. He's so smart and so great. And so I don't even question if he says, hey, take this, I'll just take it. But I'd love to know, just for my curiosity and for people listening, how the science behind that works.
Absolutely. And as you should, because it really does, as you've done it yourself, seem too good to be true, because you are eating real food that does have carbohydrates and does have healthy fats and does have calories, and not a little bit. I mean, on day one, you're having 1,100 calories. For some people, that's a regular day of food, So the science has been able to show, and really actually if we go all the way to the beginning, what we were trying to uncover is what our cell's definition of fasting is. So our dictionary definition of fasting is no food at all, just water, right? And that's because for us, it's really important that we create these kind of black and white definitions of what something is. But when we look at what our cells are looking for, our cells are kind of like, I like to think of them like having little like radars or alarm bells on their surface, kind of just scanning and looking for nutrients. And when nutrients are present in high enough amounts, and when nutrients are present in the right types, then the body can say, oh, all right, there's enough of this protein here that I can now focus on growth. But it turns out that those alarm bells, or those radars that we call nutrient sensing pathways, they're very specific to the type and amount of nutrients that will actually sound the alarm bells or trigger us out of this fasting state. And so that's what, the 30 years of research leading up to, and in the development of fasting mimicking spent time doing. What are those nutrients? How much of them can we have? When are these alarm bells sounded or not? And so what we've found out is that there are 2 major triggers that even in moderately low quantities will trigger the sensors. And then there's a handful of things that you can have a little bit more of without triggering sensors. Now, you can't have anything like unlimited except for water, right? Everything has a limit, but it just depends on what that threshold is. And so the tough ones, the ones that are really that do need to be quite limited, are going to be, for most people, they are not surprised by this one, sugar and simple sugars, simple carbohydrates. Those are always going to be low. But also protein is if we think about it, we eat a lot of protein to help our muscles grow. It is a very strong growth sensor. Our body is very attuned to protein telling us to grow. So in that scale of growth versus repair, when protein is here, we're going straight into growth mode. And so it kicks us out of that fasting state. And so during a fasting mimicking protocol, which are, by the way, short, you're only doing this for about 5 days and you're only doing this a few times a year. So I'm not telling everybody that you have to have very low protein every day. And importantly, because people always get worried when I say low protein, it's only for this period where we're going to let our body go into this fasting state. Mm. So those are the two things that we keep low, and things that are a little bit less problematic are things like healthy fats, things like fiber. And that's why you'll see in the Prolon kit, for example, there is quite a lot of carbohydrates, but a lot of that is from fiber. A lot of it is from stuff like prebiotic fibers that are also really healthy for our gut health. A lot of it is, even that it's all plant-based sources, things like nuts even, and seeds that also have carbohydrates, but also vegetables as well. So you'll see all sorts of wonderful, healthy ingredients kind of coming together to keep you in that fasted state.
And that's a really good explanation, because it's the fibrous carbs, I guess. They were the ones that in my head, I'm like, I don't know how this works, but it completely makes sense. So with that 5-day mimicking diet, obviously, I'm assuming you're going to lose a bit of muscle mass because you're not having any protein, but is it very minor compared to just doing, say, a water only? Or is there much research on how much muscle you do lose?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research on this. In fact, there's probably over a dozen studies in fasting mimicking specifically looking at muscle retention. And what we see is that it is entirely fat-focused weight loss. So we see muscle protection. Now, if you see any muscle loss, it is so small that we consider it insignificant, meaning it is not enough to tell us that there is muscle loss, and especially as it relates to the amount of weight loss. Now, when we look at something like a GLP-1, for example, just for reference, here with the weight loss that you see, let's say you lose 10 pounds, 40% of that, so 4 of those pounds, is going to come likely from muscle. That is a huge loss. That means that 4 pounds, like almost 50% of what you've lost, is coming from a place that you really don't want to lose it, and it's going to be really hard to get it back. What we see with fasting mimicking is close to 0%, right? And so this is really impactful. That means that essentially 100% of your weight loss is coming from fat exclusively, and you're keeping your muscle. Now, I cannot stress enough that both of those things matter, because yes, the weight loss is really going to be quite impactful and healthful and support your metabolic health and all these wonderful things that come with that. But protecting your muscle is what allows you to maintain the weight loss, because it allows you to maintain your metabolic rate. It allows you to maintain your strength. It allows you to maintain even the ability to stay active and mobile and have the energy to go do things that continue to keep you healthy. So, I mean, and that's really just scratching the surface. So this is really, really important difference. And I want to make one more comparison here, which is that there was a study that was done, I think it was about 1.5 years ago now, it's been a while, where they compared the fasting mimicking diet to the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is generally what we recognize as the kind of the gold standard healthy nutrition protocol. And as a dietitian, I'm a big believer in it. So don't let this sway you away from the Mediterranean diet. But the Mediterranean diet, especially if, for most people, what they end up seeing is a calorie restriction. So if you're doing this for a long period of time, you're going to see weight loss. But if you're not super careful and making sure that you have enough protein and making sure you have enough calories and making sure you're doing weight training and weight-bearing exercise, then there is a risk of losing weight. And we studied this over a period of 4 months, and the Mediterranean diet done every day for 120 days showed about a 5-pound weight loss from muscle over that period of time. And then just doing the fasting mimicking diet 5 days a month, so a total of 20 days over that whole 4-month period, didn't show any muscle loss. And both of them showed the same amount of total weight loss. So there was way more fat loss from the fasting mimicking diet and no muscle loss. And they both showed equivalent improvements in heart health, which is a big reason why people love the Mediterranean diet. So again, I mean, this is just one of the dozen plus studies. I mean, there's been studies also on not just muscle retention, but strength retention. So, this was a study done just in men, looking at strength before and strength after, and strength was maintained despite significant weight loss and improvements in metabolic health.
And I mean, that's for me, I used to compete in weight category sports, and that's the gold standard is you want to maintain your strength but lose weight. I mean, that's what every athlete is looking for. And I mean, that's great for life as well. So that's so awesome. One thing, Renee, I just got back. I try and go every summer and see my family. They're in Europe. And my parents are from France, but they met us in Italy. And I love Italian food, but only when I'm in Italy, because if I eat Italian food here, I just feel so bloated and gross. And you go there, and it's so depressing for me that you can eat like a king, pizzas and pastas and tiramisu and everything. And you just, I mean, I guess you probably walk around a bit more too on vacation, but I normally don't put on any weight on vacation and I feel great. And it's just so sad because I'm an immigrant to America. I love it, everything about America, except it's just so sad that it's so hard. You have to be just vigilant and just be so careful with what you're eating here, because there's just so much bad things in our food supply. And then I've got a little guy who's turning 5, and I'm always bugging my wife. I'm like, baby, you have to she just trusts something that looks healthy and she'll buy it for him. And I'm like, you've got to look at the ingredients. There's so much stuff in here that I don't really want him eating. So it's so depressing. But as a dietitian, how do you advise people on eating healthily when you're in a system where you go in a supermarket and I'd imagine over 90% is just terrible for you in there?
I mean, this is a huge question. And at the end of the day, my answer is highly personalized to the individual. I work with a lot of, executive CEO clients, and my recommendations to them, because they have, the money to make some choices like working with personal chefs or getting meals delivered or finding sources of nutrition that they trust, to make as many positive choices as possible through that, versus somebody who may not have that financial freedom to make some of those choices. Then we start looking at what are some economical ways to find whole plant-based foods that you can have. And maybe in those individuals, we actually start looking at canned fruits and vegetables and things like that. So, the spectrum is so wide on my recommendation, based off of individuals' means. So what I think, at the end of the day, my answer is to try and find as many opportunities to make healthy choices. Does that mean that you are always going to make a healthy choice? Very unlikely. But what we all have to do is to take a moment and look at our day of nutrition. Maybe even take an opportunity to journal, 3 days of food, and try and make at least one of them a weekday and at least one of them a weekend. And then look and see, okay, you can ideally work with a nutritionist or a dietitian to help you kind of scope that out. But I think in today's world, we all know kind of where things are going a little awry versus where things may not be, and find areas where you can make one change. If you can make one change in one area, maybe it's just, your breakfast meal, or maybe it's just the way that you snack, or, it could be anything. Find one area where you can make a positive change and do that. And for everybody, that will look totally different, because we are all in totally different spectrums of health and wellness, motivation, financial freedom, etc. And those all play into some of the decisions that we make.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a complicated. I mean, you talk for 3 hours, I'm sure, about just that, just diet. What about in terms of, I guess, just drinking a lot of water during the day? I know Tom Brady was big on that. He said almost everyone is dehydrated to an extent. And I mean, I guess water's not free. If you want to, I guess you can get a relatively cheap filter and try to get clean water. But can you talk a little bit about, I guess, hydration?
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I had this is more of a case study here, but instances where, kind of similar to your brother, where, just adding in hydration and water was able to make a very significant change. I had one of my clients tell me, she started just drinking more water and her hair just started growing, to the floor. And it's amazing. So this is, again, when we kind of come back to the cellular level. Our body is made up almost more than 50%. I think that the stat is like 75 or something like that. I'm going to misquote it, but of water. We're primarily water. And our cells are also consumed of water. There's a lot of water that is needed for communication within our cells, for a function within our cells. So all of this requires water. And so when we don't have water, we are essentially starving our body from optimal function. And if you feel dehydrated, you are way dehydrated. You can feel like you aren't thirsty and still be dehydrated. So yes, I would agree that the vast majority of at least Americans and probably in the world are dehydrated in the sense of optimal hydration.
Yeah, I think so too. Renee, what about intermittent fasting? I know there's some people think that if they just shorten their window, they can basically eat any crap they want and it's not going to make a difference. And that doesn't seem to make sense to me. But I noticed my doctor's always telling me the most important thing is 3 hours before you sleep, not to have any calories, because that's going to impact the restorative aspect of my sleep and I'm not going to get the same rest. And that was something when I was an athlete, I would always have a snack before I went to bed, something like a fat-free Greek yogurt with maybe some berries and some granola. It's a little sweet for my sweet tooth. This is protein. And I'd always think I need that to sleep. And that's been something that just the last year I've cut out, where I try not to eat a few hours before I go to sleep. And that's the hardest, I think, for people that work hard and you've had a long, productive day and you've done everything and your kids are asleep, the work's done, and you just want to put your feet up and watch an hour of Netflix and snack before bed. And that's been something that's been so difficult. Late night snacking is one of my weaknesses. But what are your thoughts on how effective intermittent fasting is, and both the comparison between the last few hours before you go to bed and also, like this morning, I'm drinking bulletproof coffee, which I want to pick your brain on. I haven't had any calories yet. It's 1 o'clock in the Midwest. So I'm not working out because of my surgery, so I'm trying to eat less anyway, but I'm trying to do a few hours in the morning, a few hours in the evening with no food, no calories.
Okay, so I have, of course, a lot to say in the world of intermittent fasting. So intermittent fasting is another one of these umbrella terms. It actually talks about a lot of different kinds of intermittent fasting. So for example, the definition of intermittent fasting, at least to me and to a lot of people in the fasting world, is that it's anything that is under 2 days of water only or fasting mimicking. So for a lot of people, when they think of intermittent fasting, they think of 16 hours or maybe 18 hours, but they seldomly think of 24 or 48 hours as intermittent fasting, but those also still apply. So some people will do things like 5-2 protocols, where they're doing 2 days of no to little calories, and that is still called intermittent fasting. So importantly, I want to just define just explore that intermittent fasting means a lot of things. So we can't necessarily always use that term and then say that everything I'm going to say applies to all intermittent fasting, because they all are a little bit different. But with that caveat, I'm going to say that intermittent fasting is typically done for a very long period of time. And so you are going into not just a calorie restriction, because in many cases, the calories are about even the same as what you would do in a regular day. But the important thing that happens when we go into intermittent fasting is that our body runs out of sugar. It runs out of stored sugar that it can use for energy. And so when our body runs out of those carbohydrates, what it does is that it will switch over to burning fat for fuel. So it goes to our fat cells and it creates energy called ketones from there. And that is really the magic of intermittent fasting. It's the ability to switch fuel sources. And there can be some really great benefits to that. As you would imagine, our body going to fat for energy can be really helpful for weight loss. It also can be helpful for people who have issues with blood sugar management. right? Because it helps us with the control of our blood sugar. Instead of having high blood sugar, we're having higher ketone levels. So there's definitely some benefit there as well. But there are some downsides. So the downsides are that when we are shrinking our eating window and we force our body to go to burn fat for fuel, it starts to set some alarm bells in our body to say, hey, there's not a lot of food here. So, we're going to put you on high alert to make sure that you know that you should be looking for food. It's again kind of our primitive brain, right? And so what happens is as our body starts increasing stress hormones like cortisol, like adrenaline, and that if it's done, for as short of a period of time as possible and not for your whole life or every day, it's okay. And you can get some of those benefits like the weight loss and the metabolic health benefits. But I really urge people to not, if you are a healthy weight, if you have healthy metabolic health, you probably don't need to do these really long everyday fasting windows. Instead, what I would recommend is circadian fasting, which is just 12 hours a day. And then, as you mentioned, optimizing that 12-hour window of nutrition so that ideally you are actually shifting it the other way, where you are having breakfast within about an hour of waking up. And then you're stopping eating at least 3 hours before bed. And that's because the reason we call this circadian eating is that it follows the circadian rhythm of our cells. The circadian rhythm of our cells is its internal body clock. All of our cells have their own little clock that they follow. And when the clock strikes whatever time it is for that given cell, it's like, oh, I'm really good. Like this is when I wake up and this is when I feel the strongest. So interestingly, like our body's ability to get rid of sugar and produce insulin and recognize insulin. So all of this like blood sugar management kind of process is really good in the morning, but it's really bad at night. And so that's why your doctor is saying, or, whoever's making this recommendation to reduce your eating window closer to bed, that's what that's for. Now, if somebody told me that they were really, really hungry before bed, then I would say, okay, well, then put on your fasting mimicking hat again. How can we support our body, give it nutrition, give it calories, give it nutrients and satiety without causing it to go out of this good fasted state? And here we would use something like, I would say, a handful of nuts. Prolon has come out with a bar called the fasting bar. Things like that are higher in fat and fiber are going to be good options at that time, and really trying to limit those high sugar items, which are unfortunately also usually the things that we're craving late at night. But if you can find some options that you do really like that are higher in healthy fats, and in moderate in protein, those are going to be better options at that time because of
that completely makes sense.
Did I answer all of them?
Yeah. So what happens? So, Renee, sorry, I'm throwing some difficult questions at you. Say tomorrow I'm going to run a half marathon at 7 a.m. Would I still have, like, nutritionally, they used to say have a big, they call it carb loading, but the more recent science, according to the things, the people that, especially when I was competing, they would say the worst thing the day before competition is to have a real heavy pasta meal or something. Yeah. They said you want to have like something like a high quality grass-fed burger with maybe some avocado. So like have some healthy fats, some good protein. That would be much better. That's what I've been told. But do you have so something like that? If I had the need to expend a lot of calories, say I'm using a half marathon as an example, but something in the morning, would I still ideally do the same thing where I still don't have anything a few hours before bed, but for my dinner, I guess should I be changing my? Should I be changing my diet that much for things like that? I mean, I'm not running 100 miles. I'm just curious on, right. Like when, I guess eating, I try to change my diet based on what I'm doing. So I haven't worked out the last week, so I've been recovering from surgery. So I'm eating, I don't really have an appetite, so I'm not eating too much. But if I'm heavily exercising. I'm gonna be more diligent about getting the fuel in so I can recover and train. I guess I was just asking about eating for performance, and I guess this is going to
Yeah.
kind of circle back to the whole muscle building versus longevity debate.
For sure. So, really cool question. And let me just first caveat this by saying that I'm not a sports dietitian. And anybody who tells you that they can be a dietitian in every spectrum, don't trust them.
Yes.
There's so much to know in the world of nutrition. But there are some things that I do know. My mother is an avid cyclist. And so I've created some nutrition plans for her. And also, just through physiology, this is what I can share. So, our body can really only hold about 12 hours or so of carbohydrates for use, right? And there is a limit to how much our body is going to be able to store, digest, consume, hold, etc. And so if you have a super huge carb loading meal before, your body's only going to be able, it's going to store so much as actual stored sugar in your liver. And the rest of it is just going to be stored as fat. And that's going to be way harder for your body to tap into when you're doing your marathon. That's why when we see people running marathons, they have those little sugar packets because they want immediate carbohydrates. They want immediate replenishment and usage. That is why you see like the high performance, especially in these long distance events, they're not doing this heavy carb loading the night before and then banking on all of the storage, which is not going to be long enough to last you a very long race. They're doing, little like bursts of very high sugar, high carbohydrate kind of top ups through their experience. So that's just kind of a note on the carbohydrate piece. So yes, I'm also in alignment on the, carb loading kind of being an outdated recommendation. Now, in terms of, maybe more, for not the people doing, marathons, and even people who do marathons, they're only doing them every now and again.
Yeah.
What we want to know is that same concept of, what's a good pre-workout? Do I need to think about what I'm having the night before to impact my pre-workout? And importantly, I would say that, and what we know in the literature is that your evening meal does have an impact on the way that your body processes sugar and glucose and manages your blood sugar. That is all based also off of what you've had the night before. So it is important for us to know, or I shouldn't say it's all based, it is impacted by what you've had the night before. So we can't just look at everything in a silo. And so, yes, what you're going to have the night before is going to impact. And what we see is that people who have higher fat, higher protein later in the evening versus those who have higher refined sugar in the evening, there's a very big difference. And the people that are in the higher fat, higher protein area are going to have more stable blood sugar responses to the same meal on the next morning.
Well, that's awesome. And I really appreciate you saying that anyone that says they know everything are kind of full of it, because I feel like I'm a black belt in real estate and I say I don't know every day. And I think that's one of my pet peeves is people that don't admit what they don't know. I think as an aside, I think one of the problems with a lot of politicians and people in high positions of power is they have big egos and they don't know what they don't know. And I think that's really important in life, is to be aware of what you don't know. So I really appreciate you saying that. What about, I know I really like what you said about shifting everything earlier, so you're kind of on the body clock of your cells. That makes sense. What about, is bulletproof coffee a myth? Because that's what I'm drinking right now. And it was ever since my buddy he gave me one of the Dave Asprey books, I think like Become Superhuman or something. And it talked about if you have black coffee, MCT oil, or good quality organic butter, and I sprinkle a bit of electrolytes in there too, your body will keep in that fasted state. Is that a myth, or is it just a sales thing? I was just curious.
So I would say, for anybody who's doing intermittent fasting with a bulletproof coffee, yes, that will keep you in a quote unquote fasted state for what you're looking to achieve, meaning not spiking your blood sugar.
Yes.
And maintaining your ketones. That's usually what people are defining when they do things like that. Now, where I would say maybe not, and I'm saying maybe because we've never actually put the bulletproof coffee to the test in fasting mimicking land. But when we do fasting mimicking protocols and we're trying to go for these longer periods, we, yes, care about our ketones and our blood sugar, but we now care about one more thing. We care about supporting something called autophagy. It is a deep cellular cleanup, and it is something that is only really activated in really long fasts. So that's why, like, when I talk to people about intermittent fasting, I'm like, well, you're not really going to turn on autophagy anyway, so it doesn't matter. Like, all we really care about is keeping your blood sugar low and your ketones. We don't care as much about not triggering mTOR, not triggering IGF-1. These are nutrient sensing pathways, by the way. We don't care so much about triggering these things that would prevent us from getting into autophagy, because we're not even going to be able to go for long enough to get there. But if your goal is to do a long fast, is to do 3, 4, 5+ days, then I would start exerting some caution on, like, maybe a bulletproof coffee. The coffee, no problem. You can have usually about 140 milligrams of caffeine without any concern. There is some research that suggests that really high amounts of caffeine could trigger one of our nutrient sensing pathways known as PKA, but it's only in mice studies. So we're kind of still 50-50 on even if, like, super high levels of caffeine would even impact humans. But because some research is suggesting maybe, we just suggest to keep it under 140 milligrams, which is about 2 cups of coffee.
Oh.
So that's that part I feel good about. Now, the butter, while it is almost exclusively fat, it does have some carbohydrates in there, and it does have a teensy bit of protein in there. So there is a world where it might impact your fast. I'm not sure. And then the MCT oil, again, probably fine, but not 100% certain. And so just because those, like, additions, those are where I start worrying. Now, what I can tell you for certainty, you wouldn't want to add that somebody who is, like, kind of has the definition of fasting that is for intermittent fasting would tell you is okay, is bone broth. Bone broth, yes, very little to no calories, only protein, maybe a little bit of fat too, depending on what bone broth you're using. And so it won't change your ketone levels and it won't change your blood sugar levels. And so therefore, yes, you're kind of in a fasted state, but 100% it's going to trigger those nutrient sensing pathways because it's jam-packed with protein. And so that's where we start worrying. So, it's that's why we're very, very cautious in the world of fasting mimicking, because it's so precise, it's so specific. And that's why when I make recommendations for fasting mimicking, I always recommend the Prolon kit, because you just don't want to risk making a bad move and choosing a little too much of one thing or not enough of something, and it all matters. So.
No, that's really helpful. So the difference between something like, say, a 24-hour water fast versus a 5-day Prolon fast is 24 hours isn't really enough. Is that right? To get the autophagy, you need the 5 days?
You need at least 3 days. So what we see is that autophagy really starts kicking in at around, like, that 72, over the 48-hour mark. So between 48 to 72, that's when it starts, like, really turning on. Now, let me just be clear. Autophagy is our body's ability to clean its cells at the deepest level. It's the ability for our cells to say, oh, that's not really working very well. That's not really working well. That's fully broken. Let's eat those so that we can rebuild, make new ones. It's this beautiful kind of rejuvenation process. And that's how we can make our cells and our body behave younger than it is, because we can do a full spring cleaning at the cellular level. That's what autophagy is. So it is always happening at a little small level, just to make sure that we don't we're always accumulating waste in our body over time, and things are always kind of breaking down. We need a little bit of that happening, but it never really turns on until we are in these longer fasted states. So it's kind of like as if you went through your whole life just doing little tiny picking up of things in your house, but never did, like, a deep clean ever. Like imagine it, yeah, like sure the house would still be okay, but it would just be covered in junk and you'd have broken chairs and broken everything, like eventually you need to replace something.
Mm.
So, and do like a really good deep clean. And that's what this is about. So around that 2 to 3 day mark, that's when it really starts, or over the 2 day mark, within that 3 day mark, that's when it really starts activating. And that's why we also recommend doing this for about 5 days, because it's one thing to really rev that up around day 3, but then it's another to really let it do the work. So you don't just want to turn it on and then turn it off. You want to turn it on and then let it do the work.
So for some, I guess it's such a pleasure talking to you about this because you know so much about it, and I'm about to do another one. I know when I did my first one, I celebrated being done by having 2 huge, not so healthy burgers. That was probably the wrong thing for my body. So I guess I just wanted to ask, when you get back onto a diet after a 5 day prolonged fast, should I be kind of giving my body, easing my way back into it?
Yes, absolutely. Now, the beauty of the Prolon kit at bare minimum is that it was specifically designed to require zero prep and zero, well, very limited post work. And so the prep work, I would say, is close to nothing unless you like have very, very high caffeine usage. You might want to taper that down, and maybe the day before you just don't want to like crazy carb load, like you don't want to have this big last supper type meal. But on the last day, I do recommend to kind of gradually taper in.
Mm.
What the general recommendation is for that day, at least for the first 2/3 of that day, to make sure to keep it more plant-based. You've been fully plant-based for the last 5 days, so limiting animal proteins during that time can be helpful. We also want to just kind of keep it clean. So generally, it's called all the things that we know, like not too much added processed food, added sugar, processed food, not too much saturated fats, like just kind of this heavy stuff that might weigh you down. That's what you don't want. Your body really is a temple at this point, and it's so clean, and it will not be super thrilled with you if you go the other direction. And let me tell you, as somebody, I've done the fasting mimicking diet about 15 times now. I'm gearing up for my next round. And I one time also had a burger. My husband had taken me to this place and he had not done the fasting mimicking diet. And so he's like, this is what you're going to want. I always wake up on day 6 and I don't even want to have breakfast. I'm like, I'm feeling so good. I just want to keep it up. Maybe I'll be like, okay, fine. I'll have a green smoothie or have a salad, but that's like what I want. And it's interesting because we've done studies and it's also what a lot of people want, because you're just like so in that mindset and your body just feels so good. So when I went there, I was like, okay, yeah, like, I mean, I do love this burger. So I had it, and I don't think I've ever felt so awful from a meal without it being food poisoning.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I felt awful after mine, and I felt kind of like I just ruined some of the great effects of the last 5 days. So what
well,
about,
the beauty of these protocols is that they don't have, like, they can't be ruined that fast. The amount of deep cleaning work that you've done over this 5-day period is so immense that even, the studies have shown in individuals who have done cycles of 3 or more, even 3 months later of resuming a healthy diet, they maintained about 70% of those benefits. In some of the benefits up to 80%. And that's why we always recommend that you do a top up around the 3-month mark so that you fill back up to your 100%. But it's really cool. Like it's kind of this, I hate to say this as a dietitian, but kind of like a free pass on a lot of things. It's kind of like this cleanup crew, but it's great because it lets you say, yes, I can indulge here and there. Yes, you don't have to be perfect all the time. This can come in and do a lot of really good work and stay there, even with a regular diet outside of that.
right? No, that makes sense. What about exercise? I think the recommendation was like a brisk walk or something like that. I probably overdid it a little bit, but I definitely didn't go crazy. But is exercising, if you feel okay, like if your energy levels are okay, is that okay while you're doing the 5-day fast?
Yeah, I mean, we do recommend that it's like light to moderate exercise during that period, but we recommend that. So we want people to be moving somewhat, but ideally it should be walking, light yoga, stretching, things like that, that help your body just kind of like flush everything out. Movement is really good for that, but not so much that you are burning a ton of calories. It honestly, we've not done the studies of people doing really high intensity exercise along with fasting mimicking, but there is fear that certainly that it would make it harder, but also that it would potentially impact your muscle protection and some of the things that we see with fasting mimicking. So we just to my high achievers out there, my optimizers, my biohackers, I will say this 100 times and they won't listen and they just do their thing anyway. But and that's totally cool as long as you can do it, right? And just know that I did not make that recommendation because liability's sake, I do not want to be the person telling you to do that. But yeah, it's been done in all sorts of ways.
Gotcha. Well, we don't have too much time, but I really want to just kind of end, if we could, circling back to that the balance that so many people are walking, myself included, between everyone. Like Peter Attia is always talking about like weight training for longevity. It's so important, strength training, and then longevity. And I know I do feel I had a period of being a vegetarian, and I definitely feel better eating red meat. And the animal lover in me doesn't like that. But my doctor, my longevity doctor, is always saying, the one that recommends the prolonged fast, he says every quarter I should be doing it. But if I can't do every quarter, I should do it every 6 months at least. He's always on me to eat more of a vegetarian diet and to ease up on the red meats. But I feel like I'm so confused on that because all the studies, I don't think there's too many that differentiate between people that are eating McDonald's red meat, or like me, my wife loves to cook grass-fed steak and I'm having it with vegetables and everything's organic. And I feel like there's not too much differentiation between really high quality protein and not so high quality. So I guess throwing it at you, I'd love to kind of pick your brain and hear your thoughts on those.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and I think that is now actually quite a bit of research that's starting to come out from I think it's out of Stanford actually, but I don't hold me to that one. It might be Cornell or a couple of the other places, but like one of those nutrition research expert schools that are doing a lot of research in some of these questions exactly, and really putting premium quality animal protein against premium quality plant-based proteins. And we are, it's hard when we do longevity studies because you have to have data for a long period of time. But it does still seem like there is a difference. And importantly, what we need to recognize is that the difference between animal proteins and plant-based proteins is a lot of things. It's not just even that there's different amino acid profiles, which also do play a big part in longevity. But at the end of the day, based off of all of the research that I have seen thus far, I'm certainly a believer that reducing your amount of animal-based proteins is beneficial. So limiting it, right? Now, even though, Dr. Walter Longo is going to tell you to be essentially on an almost exclusively plant-based diet, I just say, I kind of lean a little bit more towards a, flexitarian, with the vast majority of your protein sources being from plant-based sources. And that's, again, because what we've seen is that the amino acids and the composition of plant-based foods doesn't seem to trigger our nutrient sensing pathways. And the nutrient sensing pathways, it matters more than just fasting. These are also pro-aging pathways. So when they're always being turned on, which is what happens with animal-based proteins, they're always like signaling growth, which also means signaling aging. So it's, really, it kind of comes back to this balance between longevity and building muscle. And there is a kind of like, you want to kind of even those things out. And that's why for me, I have always thought that it's primarily plant-based, if you're really looking to optimize your total protein intake, sure, maybe some meat here and there is probably fine, but you do want to limit it because of those amino acid profiles that are just not fully in favor
Gotcha. That makes
of
sense.
longevity.
Do you have a couple of vegetarian high protein meals that you really like things like lentils or things like that?
Yes, I'm a big bean and also chickpea girl. I love anything like that. Like the stews, the chilies, those ones are that's kind of like a go-to in our house. I'm also, and this one I want to just maybe do a little caveat on because I think that tofu has gotten a really bad rap, especially in men's health, because of this whole estrogen debate. And let me just be very clear that phytoestrogen present in tofu is not going to cause you to grow breasts and increase your estrogen dramatically. Now, I do believe that, especially with soy-based products, go organic, find the cleanest one that you can find, just because it is kind of highly manufactured. But tofu is phenomenal, especially if you can go the whole version of it, which is edamame. So that's a really great source. And so we do a lot with tofu, like tofu stir fries, tofu soups. And I even have started doing some days where instead of protein powder in my morning smoothie, I will just do like half of a block of tofu in there, and it makes it super silky and creamy and delicious. So don't knock it until you try it. I'm telling you, it's like tofu's great because it doesn't really taste like anything. You can make it taste like whatever you want if you're good in the kitchen. So
What with protein, I know when I was younger, I always used to have whey protein, and I don't know why. The last few years, I switched to I think it's called hemp protein. Do you have any thoughts on
oh,
that?
okay.
I
Yeah.
read something that said hemp is better. I I can't remember where I get my sources, but I just made the change and it's been great. So I'd love to if you had any thoughts on different types of
Well,
protein when you make smoothies.
yeah. So when you choose a plant-based protein, I am a fan of choosing plant-based proteins that do use a few different plants, so not just a single source, especially if it's something that you use consistently, right? So even if you love your hemp protein, maybe you want to also get a pea protein or something else to kind of like diversify a little bit. Now, again, so Prolon has a really incredible protein powder. It's called the L protein. It stands for longevity protein, and it's made with black bean, chickpea, and pea protein. It's a combination of those three. Plus, they add an amino acid called methionine. Methionine is very much lacking in pretty much any and all other plant-based proteins, and that's actually part of what make them really great for longevity, because methionine can especially activate our pro-aging and pro-growth pathways. But when we want a protein powder, we also want to protect our muscles. So this protein adds in the tiniest little bit just so that we can have a full, complete amino acid sequence, support muscle protection, support muscle growth without excessively activating pro-aging pathways, and choosing three other plant-based sources that are completely deficient or very negligible in those amino acids. So not to get too nerdy in all of this, but all proteins are so unique. And so at the end of the day, just like how, I wouldn't tell you, even though I love kale, for example, I think kale is amazing. I wouldn't tell you that's the only vegetable you should eat, or even the only leafy green you should eat, because there are so many varieties out there. But I do believe that plant-based sources of protein powders are going to be a safer bet in terms of amino acid sequence. There are a lot of research, and at this point, a lot of it is articles coming out about heavy metals in plant-based sources of protein. So also make sure that you're getting plant-based sources from reputable brands, trusted brands that have like any of the prop labeling when they need to have prop labeling on them, and that are doing the tests on their product. So that is also something to be mindful of. Do not get any supplements or proteins from anywhere that is not a reputable brand.
Well, I'm so glad you said that because I just got my metals and my plastics checked, and they were both on the high side. And I'm like, I don't know how that's possible because I really try to watch what I get. I'm very careful. But I guess my same doctor told me in this day and age, it is what it is, unfortunately.
It's everywhere.
I really appreciate you taking the time. You're such a good spokesman for Prolon because you look vibrant and healthy. You're incredibly knowledgeable. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I'll give you the last word, but I'll put any links you want in the show notes.
Fabulous. Well, again, thank you for having me. Truly such a pleasure to be here. I am vibrant and healthy because of practicing what I preach. I truly believe in these things, and I hope that at bare minimum, we've just piqued some curiosity. If you are interested in learning more, please don't hesitate to find me on Instagram. Social is probably the fastest and easiest way to reach me at Fitton Nutrition. That's Fitton Nutrition. You can also check out my website, fittonnutrition.com. And I would recommend, if you're interested in learning more about Prolon, go check out prolonlife.com. So that's PROLON life.com. And there's also now another fasting mimicking company that does a medically tailored. So they add doctors and dietitians and support for anybody who's looking to reverse diabetes or do some really incredible things to their metabolic health. And that company is called L Nutra Health. So you can check them out at L-Nutra health.com.
Wow, that's so awesome. Well, I'm gonna order that Prolon protein, and I'm gonna get my wife and I the 5-day fast for next week. So I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm so glad we connected.